Hey everybody, thanks for joining us for another episode of Mind Warp Radio. Today's episode is Video Games, Mindfulness, and Spirituality. As you could imagine from the title, we're going to be talking about video games and how they could be integrated into your spirituality, and also how they can be approached mindfully. I'm just going to let the cat out of the bag and say I am pro video games. I think that they are very fun, and I think they can even improve your life in moderation, of course, and that's going to be another theme throughout this episode: moderation. If you're somebody who tries their best to practice mindfulness and just be aware of yourself and others in the world, you might be like me in the sense where with video games, it might sound silly, but I did struggle with playing video games in the sense where I thought, is this a waste of my time? Should I just completely give this up and focus my energy on being creative or working or something else like that? But hopefully with sharing this today, I could just let you in on my current mindset surrounding video games and maybe even make you feel better if you found yourself questioning, are video games worth your time or not? So we're going to dive into the mindfulness aspect regarding video games first. In my opinion, video games can provide a meditative-like state when you're playing them, which can allow your mind to be cleared of your daily problems and just whatever else might be on your mind. This allows your mind to take a break, and it also allows your mind to process behind the scenes maybe something that's going on for you on a deeper level. For me, playing video games is kind of the same as the feeling I get when I get stoned, where I could kind of just zone out and zone into something not related to me. At the end of a long day, I find that playing a little bit of video games can be extremely relaxing and also very therapeutic and calming for these exact reasons. It puts me into a meditative state where I'm able to just completely relax and focus on something entirely different from myself. When playing video games, I think keeping balance in mind is very important. There are obviously some people who are addicted to video games or who even struggle with playing video games too much, to the point where it's affecting other aspects of their life. And obviously at that point, it's a problem, and that's not going to get you anywhere in life if you're consumed by video games. I think that when video games are incorporated into a balanced and an already full life, that they can be extremely fun and beneficial. Something else when it comes to balance and video games, which ties into my budget episode, is money. So video games can be a very expensive hobby. Number one, you will most likely have to purchase a console of some kind to play them. And number two, buying new releases can be extremely expensive. A console will run you anywhere from $300 to $500 unless you get a pretty good deal. And new video games usually retail for $60. And unfortunately, for the newest generation, I believe some of them range around $70 for a new game. So, keeping in mind balance and the monetary aspect, personally, I'm somebody who, I have a PlayStation 4 now, right? Which was considered current generation until the PlayStation 5 came out. I got my PS4 around like November 2019, I want to say, so not quite 2 years ago. And this was considered close to the end of this console's life cycle. Until then, I was playing my Xbox 360 when I would play video games. That console lasted me a good 10 years, by the way. Basically, I got onto the PS4 bandwagon when it was a little bit cheaper. For most games that I get, I will get them on a really good sale. A lot of the games I have in my library, I purchased for around $5 to $15. Certain titles I would spend $20 or $30 on if it was something I really knew I wanted to play. I have not spent $60 on a video game in years, probably since I was a teenager. I'm mentioning this because video games can be easy to overspend on, and it can be very tempting to dish out like a large amount of money in order to play them. But if you don't mind waiting and keeping your eye on a game you like and waiting until it gets really cheap or placed on a really good sale, then I think it's very easy to incorporate into your budget and into your financial life as well. And like I mentioned, buying a console, it's not cheap. It will definitely be an investment, but apart from that, you really do not need to spend much money at all in order to enjoy video games. As I mentioned, video games shouldn't get in the way of goals, responsibilities, your social life, hobbies, and as long as you're able to keep up with your everyday life and just implement video games in on the side as a fun hobby you like to have, there's nothing wrong with that in my opinion. Right now in my life, I have to say, I feel like I have a really good relationship with video games because I just use it as a tool to relax and have fun. It's so much fun. And also to experience a storyline or a certain game that I might be drawn to. I feel that I have a very balanced life, and usually at the end of a long day, I'll play video games for 30 minutes, sometimes an hour, I have to admit. But for me, like, it just feels very, very balanced. I don't feel like any part of my life is suffering from video games, and sometimes they even inspire me to create more, giving myself a little rest. I have almost more creative energy to move forward with. Video games can be addicting, and I think they can also be used as a coping mechanism a little too much, if that makes sense. For example, when I was a kid, I lived in a small town and I was a bit of an outcast, so I didn't really have any friends, and I spent a lot of time alone basically, and a coping mechanism for me was video games. I played a lot of video games, I have to admit a little too much. Was it fun? Yeah, but I also could have been focusing my energy on something more productive. I'm saying this just to say at this point in my life, I feel very balanced with video games, and I think balance is just super important. Balance and moderation. Something else when it comes to mindfulness is monitoring how you feel playing a certain game or just video games in general. If you're finding that video games are draining you or a certain game may make you feel more tense than another one, that's something to just be mindful of and how long you're spending being in that state. For me, I usually play games that just make me feel good or that I'm emotionally invested in. Now I'm going to share a few aspects of video games relating to spirituality, at least in my opinion. So now we're at the spirituality side of the episode. Playing video games is a way to put yourself in another's shoes. You'll be playing as characters that are in certain situations, experiencing stories that are outside of yourself, and in my opinion, being emotionally invested in an interactive story like this can actually kind of make you feel more understanding and more empathetic to others. So that's something I think is cool about video games that isn't really talked about all that much. It's usually talked about the negative sides of video games, but I really do believe that it can just help with empathy, understanding, and connectiveness via characters and stories outside of yourself that may not even be true for your personal story in any way. Video games can also be a tool for self-discovery, whether it's seeing something reflected in a video game you realize is within you, or even just exploring other facets of your personality. I think they can help you connect with yourself in ways that you may not even have the opportunity to in real life. Risk-taking is something huge in video games. A lot of games involve strategic thinking, and I think this aspect of playing games can be rewarding, and it can even instill in you the weight of choices in life. In open-ended games, you're usually able to play in alignment with your own personal morals or values, which can feel rewarding to do in a 3D space that doesn't hold any weight on your actual life. Video games can also teach patience in a world where we have so much instant gratification. While it may not be the same as working towards something in real life, you're putting in effort to either get through a story or build up your skill in a video game, and that takes time, even having to restart a level time and time again just to get through to the next section. And I feel like this can also teach us that failure is okay, and if you don't take risks and fail, you'll never get to that other side. Video games can teach us lessons that can be applied to our real lives. For example, in The Sims, you can live out any dream career that you would want to, and there's no real risk in that. You can just live it out and kind of put some virtual feelers out there, and you could even apply it to your own life and implement some of the steps taken into your own journey. For example, if you want to be like a famous painter and your sim is a famous painter in your game, you can see, okay, well, they practice painting every day and they sold their paintings at an art gallery. I definitely think that video games can help you feel more connected to yourself and even bring you closer to your highest version. Another positive of video games is they can be a great outlet for anger. If you're pissed off, just turn on Grand Theft Auto and beat the shit out of some strangers. It's not going to do you any harm in real life, as long as you're capable of differentiating between right and wrong in your real life. It's not going to be a problem to take your anger out in the virtual space of gaming. Connecting with others online is a pretty big part of gaming, especially these days, of course. And while this may not hold the same weight as a relationship you have in real life, there is something to be said for playing a game alongside others and using cooperative gameplay with others. It just feels really fun, and it sort of feels like a little connection that may not be a physical connection, but just a positive force at that time. Video games can also be commentary on hard social situations or subjects like depression, abuse, anxiety, the list goes on. One of my favorite things about gaming is it inspires creativity and encourages creativity, whether that's in-game or out of game. In-game, video games often make you think outside the box to solve puzzles or to get to the next level of the game, whatever it may be. To mention The Sims again, a game like this allows so much creativity. You build your house, you choose your career, you build your Sims, you choose what you're gonna do every day. It just incubates so much creativity. It's so much fun to just play something that you just get to create anything you want. There aren't really any rules. You don't have to worry about messing up in real life. You just kind of do whatever you want. And I think there's something really fun and even liberating about that creativity that you can just express in a video game so freely. Video games can also inspire creativity out of game too. I know for myself, I've even written songs inspired by a video game. I wrote a song inspired by my favorite video game, Fatal Frame, one time. It was like a dark, creepy song. Another perfect example, the Silent Hill movies were inspired by the Silent Hill games. There's a lot you can take from a game experience into the real world, whether it's through inspiration, lessons, or whatever else it may be. I know personally, after I allow myself to have a break while I'm playing games, coming out of it, sometimes I'll have more energy and especially more creative energy since I allowed my mind to rest and for the weight of the day to just roll off my shoulders. I've heard Animal Crossing described as a spiritual game, and of course a game that you can pretty much just create pretty freely as long as you got the bells for it. But yeah, I've heard that described as a spiritual game, I think because it's so relaxing and calming and so easygoing, there's no violence, and you can really just live this beautiful, peaceful life. And I think some people may feel that it just helps bring them in touch with their highest version, like I mentioned, and just allows them to really relax and get into like a Zen state of mind. I've also heard, so I haven't played these games, but I've heard the game Journey described as a spiritual game as well. And a game, I believe it's pronounced Rime, not sure, it's R-I-M-E. I don't know much about Journey or Rime, but Animal Crossing I have played, and I can definitely see why it would be described as a spiritual game. This pretty much brings us to the end of the episode, but I will leave you with some final thoughts about video games. Video games can serve as a break from real life, and they can provide a much-needed sense of relaxation after a long day. When played in moderation and kept in balance with life, video games can be so much fun. They can help you de-stress, and they can help you have experiences outside of yourself that can lead to more empathy and understanding for others. I would go as far as saying many video games are a true work of art in a similar way that movies or music is a work of art. They can evoke strong emotions, they can inspire you, and they could just be something that you turn to for some calmness. Of course, life itself is much more fun and fulfilling than a video game can be, but like I said, I think that video games are so much fun. I think they get a really bad rep in the media, and I even hear people generally talking bad about video games. I do agree that video games can have a downside, and if you're somebody who maybe is prone to addiction or you're really leaning on video games as a coping mechanism, I think that certain individuals do get pulled in to the point where they're not really doing much else. And of course, that's a problem. So that pretty much brings us to the end. I just want to wrap up with rambling on about a few of my favorite video games. So if you're not interested in that, it might be a good time to exit the podcast. And I thank you for listening, of course. So I'm recording this podcast, pre-recording it. It's currently June 17th. And for me, it's a really exciting time in video games, which is kind of what inspired me to make this, even though it's something I already wanted to touch on. So 2 things. Dead by Daylight is one of my favorite video games. For me, it's like very meditative, and oddly, horror games I find to be really compelling and dark and beautiful, so I love horror games. And Dead by Daylight strikes a really good balance of horror and meditative because It's a match-based game, so you sort of play rounds with other players. There's 1 killer and 4 survivors. I like to play as survivor, and basically you have to escape this entity's grasp and escape the killer. Long story, really fun game, but they recently dropped their Resident Evil DLC, and I love Resident Evil, so of course I had to put that into my budget and get it, because man, like, it's so cool. So I think this is really exciting, the Resident Evil DLC. Another of my favorite video games, and actually my favorite video game ever, is the Fatal Frame series. My favorite is Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly. It's another horror game series, and it's really exciting right now in regards to Fatal Frame because they actually announced that the 6th Fatal Frame game will be brought to PS4, PS5, pretty much all the consoles, all the previous and current gen consoles right now. And this is a really cool moment in the Fatal Frame fan community because these games don't typically release in the US. The first trilogy released on PlayStation 2 and Xbox in the United States, but this is a Japanese video game series, and I think it's just a little bit more niche. So they weren't releasing the next few titles in the United States at all, but they're porting the 6th game to current gen consoles in the United States, which is so exciting. I think it originally released in 2015 or so, but like I said, people in the States haven't had a chance to play it. Now, this will be a rare, and I mean rare exception, where I will probably pay full price for a video game because I love Fatal Frame. It's just my favorite game series ever. Like, it's honestly priceless to me, so I'll probably just bite the bullet on that one, and that one only. That's like the only game I would ever pay full price for. But basically, so enough rambling about that, but the premise of Fatal Frame, usually, so the first game, I'll just give the premise, right? In the first game, you play as a woman named Miku, and she's searching for her brother who went to this mansion called Himaru Mansion, and it is notorious for being extremely haunted in the area, and he actually went to look for his mentor, who's an author. So it's kind of like her brother goes to look for a missing person, and then her brother becomes a missing person, so she goes to look for him. Well, plot twist, it's haunted. And you get there and you get followed and stalked and attacked by various ghosts throughout this mansion as you're uncovering the mystery of the mansion and what truly happened there. And your only weapon is this camera where you have to take photos of ghosts in order to fight them and to get them to go away and to advance the story. So I do honestly wonder what drew me to this series. I got really into it when I was 12 years old or so, which I don't really know why. I was just always obsessed with horror to begin with. But recently, now that I kind of am doing this episode with spirituality and mindfulness included with video games, I was trying to dig into my psyche a little bit. I found myself wondering, why did I feel so drawn to this game series specifically, and why does it still draw me to this day and just hold so dearly in my heart? And the explanation I came up with was, I think it's just, what compels me about the game is it's just so dark and haunting and beautiful at the same time. And I think just the concept of facing your fears and pushing through this darkness and pushing through the horrors of like a haunted or a cursed space with the hopes of reaching somebody that you love is kind of just haunting and beautiful to me. And it just touches on like, how far would you go and what are you willing to face in order to see your loved one again, or to even save your loved one from a bad fate. So I think that kind of is what pulls me. Not to mention, I just love horror and I love the aesthetics. I'm not gonna lie, I just love the horror aesthetics. So favorite game ever. The second one is really interesting too. It's a similar premise to the first. However, you play as one of two twins, Mio. You have this twin sister. She's super annoying, but basically she gets lost in the woods and you're searching for her. You end up in this cursed village. Similar concept. So much fun. Definitely love Fatal Frame. I love The Sims. I used to play it a lot as a kid, and I really love the direction it's going now. Sims 4 has really become like one of my favorite games, so I definitely recommend playing The Sims if you're looking for something relaxing. Fatal Frame maybe if you like a darker storyline and you're more into the story. Roller Coaster Tycoon. My favorite Roller Coaster Tycoon is Roller Coaster Tycoon 2. Pixel art, super relaxing, so I recommend that as well for a relaxing game. And my final game, just a classic, Grand Theft Auto. I grew up playing Grand Theft Auto from a very young age, and I really believe that video games do not cause violence. I think if you're someone maybe who's prone to violence or you have a hard time separating a game from reality, then I think maybe it's not a good idea. But generally speaking, everyone I know who plays Grand Theft Auto, and including myself, I'm like not a violent person at all. Like, I'm vegan. I mean, it doesn't mean I'm not violent, but I don't know. I just could not ever picture myself hitting somebody. But Grand Theft Auto, I grew up playing it. I've played it with my family. My cousin, my cousin, and my grandma would play it together. So much fun. Not to mention, it's such a good outlet for anger. Like I mentioned before, like if you're pissed off, just beat the shit out of somebody in Grand Theft Auto. Run over a pile of pedestrians. Like, it's not gonna cause any real world harm as long as you know that it's separate from the real world. So basically, those are my recommendations. For storyline and horror, I would totally recommend Fatal Frame. Also, The Last of Us. I loved The Last of Us Part 1 and 2. And then in terms of relaxation, I love The Sims, Roller Coaster Tycoon, and Animal Crossing. I don't currently play, but it's really fun and relaxing. And then if you need to get some anger out, I would totally recommend Grand Theft Auto, or even Dead by Daylight if you play as killer. And Dead by Daylight's a good game too. Anyway, that includes my TED Talk on video games. I am for video games, and I think in moderation, they are another layer of enrichment to your life. Thank you for tuning into Mind Warp Radio. You can check out mindwarpradio.com for a related blog post and various other fun stuff. If you enjoyed this episode and you like video games, feel free to send it to a friend who might enjoy it as well, or rate the podcast on whatever streaming platform you're listening on, because it really helps spread the podcast and boost the podcast, which is helpful for me continuing to do this. I'm having a lot of fun delving back into this finally. And until then, peace out and play some video games. Don't feel guilty about it. Play video games. They're fun and they can be enriching, and it's a work of art, and I stand by that. All right, guys, talk to you next time.